Tonight's lesson is about the psychology of perception. And so for those of you who are currently taking psychology, you'll be able to add some additional information that could help us better understand this idea. But basically what we're talking about here is how our mind interprets the information that we perceive or that we acquire through our senses. So perception is a subjective experience. Pain, taste, and color are all things that we can see and feel and whatever differently. And so when we think of a burning hand in the fire, for example, we can, some of us have higher thresholds for pain. Coke, for example, some people prefer Coke versus Pepsi. I personally don't like Pepsi. I think it's too sweet. Coke isn't as sweet, and you get the idea. And then there's the whole idea that the grass is greener on the other side, which is a whole different issue altogether. But that each of us can use our senses and our minds interpret it just a little bit differently from the next person. We're all unique in our interpretation of what we perceive. So let's consider this question. If a tree falls in a forest with no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, the answer is that it does make sound, but it doesn't make sound. And so if we look at the two definitions of sound, the first is our physical sound. And this goes to our conversation that we had during our seminar about the physical definition of sight. And so with the vibrations in the air, yada, 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 there is a sound one, but experienced sound, the actual crash, bang, that should be bang, sorry, wallop that we hear when we hear the tree hit the ground does not happen because we are not there to hear it. So we need to consider this explanation when we think of the subjective nature of perception. So we could also apply that same philosophy or methodology or way of thinking to the following questions. And one is, if we were to remove ears surgically from all responsive beings, would the world revert to silence? It's something to think about. We'll talk about this in the next class. So if a rose garden flowers and then dies in an uninhabited garden with no one there to see it, does it have a color? And then the last one, when you leave here each day, do the desks stay in the room? How do you know that they stay in the room? How do you know that somebody doesn't take them all out and then put them all back every day or once a week or once a month? Do you know that? And then we've already referenced this several times so far this semester, but how do you know the light goes out when you close the fridge? And this is the child's question. And many of us, as we were children, would open and close the door to double check to see what was happening. So there are three theories of reality that we need to consider. The first is common sense realism. This means the way we perceive the world mirrors the way the world is, which means what you see is actually what is there. It's what makes sense. There's no trickery. There's no reason that we are making mistakes with our own perception. The next is scientific realism. The world exists as an independent reality, but is very different from the way we perceive it. And this is the view that the world is described by science in the real world. And this is the idea that our understanding of the world around us is so small and so basic that we can't possibly have a good understanding. And then there's phenomenalism. And this just means that matter is simply the permanent possibility of sensation. It makes no sense to say, and it's really small, so we got to move it up, to say that the world exists independent of our experience of it. And this is the whole idea that to be is to be perceived. So that if you believe that that you are actually in existence, that means other people perceive that you are there. So, what should we believe? If you push empiricism to its you end up with counterintuitive conclusions. So if we push and push and push and push and push our empiricism or our ability to use perception to acquire knowledge, then we will come to the point where we can't justify it and it's counterintuitive, and so we shouldn't do that. So it is important to push our perception, but at the same time we need to be able to trust it to an extent as well. So in terms of conscious awareness, there are two distinct elements. One is sensation and one is interpretation. So we have the information coming in, our senses recognize it, and then our brain interprets it. In terms of perceptual illusions, we talked about a few the other day. There are 4 basic kinds, and we're going to talk about these in class tomorrow. We have context, figure and ground, visual grouping, and expectations. And that's all I've got for you tonight. Good night.